Welcome to Andy Odovok, Dongle Madness, and I have with me here these two boxes here inside. These are Luxury and Precision W4 and W4EX, the latest flagship dongles from them. So let's just have a look first, at the price for this W4. As you can see here, and this is in Malaysian ringgit, by the way. This W4 is priced at Malaysian ringgit 2069, which is in US dollar 482 US dollar. And the second version, which is the EX, is priced at 1499 ringgit Malaysia, which is 352 US dollar. Okay, so let's just have a look now at the specification itself. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm just going to show you here on screen, as you can see right now. So essentially this W4, the both of them, despite being categorized differently with the EX for the second one, is in fact an in-house built-in Delta Sigma DAC, and it is called LP5108, and the EX version comes with an EX suffix, as you can see here. So what are the differences between these two? Yeah, okay. At least on paper, this is how they differ from one to another. So the resolution itself is pretty much similar. It can decode any PCM up to 384 kilohertz or DSD 256. And the signal to noise ratio for the W4 itself is quite impressive at 134 dB, and the W4EX at 132 dB. Okay, so just 2 dB differences, but let me just tell you this. Anything above 100, literally, I don't know, perhaps my ear, right? I am not hearing any kind of audible distortion or noise or perceived distortion, all right? So for as long as, I have tested it with some of my sensitive IEM, as low as 8 ohm with sensitivity above 120 dB. And suffice to say that I am definitely not hearing any kind of noise. So it is definitely very silent. One of the most silent dongle you can expect. And the next major difference would be perhaps the most important one as well is the power rating. The W4 itself is quite impressive at 420 milliwatt of power, right? Pretty high. And then you are paying less, right? For something which is, like, say, half the power of this W4 in the form of the EX version. So it is rated at 220 milliwatt. Still very high as well. And that is actually power rating based on the 4.4 mm balance. And of course, both of them carries this 4.4 and 3.5 mm single-ended. And another major difference would be, of course, the color. Obviously, as you can see here, and if you have seen my unboxing video, right, the W4 itself comes in this powder gray. The EX version can be easily identified by being blue in color, precisely Prussian blue. And you would notice here, even the firmware, and by the way, the moment if you receive this, right, the best thing that you can do, first and foremost, would be to upgrade the firmware. And few weeks after the release of this both of this W4, Luxury and Precision, in fact, updated the firmware for both of them. And in fact, both of them uses the exact same firmware. And how do you get about updating it? You can go to actually this website here, which is Music Tech in US. And the good thing is that I really appreciate Music Tech for doing this, because when you Google for W4 firmware, and most likely you'll be directed to the Chinese website of Luxury and Precision. In fact, I find it kind of like, mind-boggling that it is not updated properly. Okay, but at least we have here Music Tech providing it, so easy for everyone to just simply click and download the whole file. And the updating of the firmware itself is pretty much very straightforward. So the entirety of my review is, in fact, I have spent practically 90% of my listening and testing session under this new firmware of version 1.0.1.2 AS. I don't know what is that AS. So that is precisely the major difference between those two, at least on paper. One of the primary reason and the appeal for this both of this W4 is in fact the feature it offers. So the best way to show it to you is in fact to do it on screen right now. As you can see, I already connected this W4 here, EX, W1, and in fact this is how it looked like. The first time when you press this, the first thing you're going to see is EQ. So we have here a few. Let me just go through. Okay, go back to normal here. Normal is no EQ, no any kind of adjustment to the sound frequency itself. Okay, and then when clicking here, so we have rock, pop, classic, jazz, bass, movie, game, and normal again. So let me just talk a bit about this EQ. You see, the thing is that I am not the kind of person who use EQ at all. In fact, I never use them for the last 3 years. Okay, I always prefer to use my audio equipment without any kind of coloration or adjustment to listen as how they are intended to be. But if you are the type who like to do a bit of adjustment or a bit of spicing up to the sound itself, definitely this W4 and W4EX, both of them have exact same function, would allow you to at least select a preset of sound of how you want it to be. Perhaps, by having different kind of IEM or partners, you would be able to strike a better synergy. Okay, so the next one after EQ is, of course, the SDF. So now this SDF is in fact another type of EQ, or should I say sound profile, which have been designated for several type of IEM that I can see here. So let's just go through one by one. After normal, there is Salento, which is biodynamic, I think. And then Sennheiser IE800S and Shure SE846. And then Sony Z1R, and then M9, and then IE600, and then go back to normal. And again, I did not use any of this sound profile because I don't have any of those IEM. W4 and W4EX offer two type of gain level, which is high and low. Okay, and after gain we have here filter. Now this is very interesting. Okay, just like any good dongle, okay, W4 also offer the ability to change the sound filter. Okay, let's just have a look here. So normally, all right, I would always prefer to use this NOS, right? So NOS simply means no oversampling. Again, because I am the type of person who always prefer something which is transparent, right? Without any kind of alteration from the DAC itself, set it to NOS, and it simply means that you are telling the DAC don't do anything about the sampling, whether upsampling or downsampling. Okay, but if you want to try something else, right? Of course, we have the typical one, which is fast, slow, LL fast, LL slow, and then again NOS. All right. So quickly on the subject of filter. All right. So most of the time, for example, when I use other type of dongle which offer this sort of filter, I will look into what type of IEM or headphone that I connect it to. For the most part, like I say, I always use NOS so that I know that it will not change anything. But if I were to use something which is relatively brighter and neutral, I have found that most other DAC would be more suitable using the slow type filter, because what it does is that most of the time it will impact the way the decay stage are being handled. It is in fact a manner of saying it is smoother. All right. So, but if you have something which is relatively like slower or warmer sounding IEM or headphone, perhaps it is better to use fast filter or fast roll off filter. However, I must put it this way as well. After testing a bit on that filter, perhaps it is the limitation of my hearing. changing between the filter does not seem to impart any kind of audible differences, at least to my listening equipment and my listening ability. So, and the next one after that would be UAC, of course. All right. So the good thing about this W4, both W4 and EX, is that it will allow you to choose UAC mode. For example, you have a need to connect to an older device which only work in UAC 1. Now, let's talk a bit more on the volume adjustment here. Okay, as you can see, this volume adjustment offer 100 steps, right? There, maximum. And it is tactile, very precise, and in fact, the design and the ergonomic of it is one of the reasons that I find it to be very, very interesting and very usable. And to me, being able to adjust volume level at micro level is definitely part of the enjoyment of the music itself, especially when you're listening to shuffle mode, switching between songs, being able to get the correct level, especially if you like to switch between different IEM or headphone, is a huge plus in my book. Okay, before I proceed with the sound element of this W4 and W4EX, let me just share with you some of the equipment that I have used to test it. And in fact, I have been saying this so many times, you cannot judge a dongle or any DAC on its own. It is always be judged on what type of equipment you use. Okay, so in this case, in particular, I have actually spent quite a lot of time using both of them with this new favorite of mine, which is Final Audio A5000, which is a single dynamic driver, excellent sounding. In fact, this is my #1 favorite now. Okay, and I also have with me here this very sensitive hybrid, bone conduction hybrid of Bequest Winter, right? I equally love this, definitely. And of course, I also have with me here this another hybrid, which is a 3-driver hybrid of Kinera Idun Golden. Okay, very neutral sounding IEM. And I also have this, my favorite magnetic planar IEM, which is Tangzu Zetianwu Heyday. Okay, and last but not least, you see these two here, Tanjin Zeros. Alright, this is my favorite. And the reason that I'm using these two is that because despite the illegally cheap price, and in fact crazy price at 14 US dollar, this Tanjin Zero has proven so many times to be the most scalable among many of the IEM. So it will be able to tell me what sort of quality the source offers. And in fact, you notice that I have two, because this is the standard 3.5 mm and this is the balanced version, which I customized myself. And in order to test the top of the line TOTL sound, I also have here with me this Shure KSE 1500, which is a true electrostatic IEM. Alright, and of course, not limited to just IEM, I also have my headphones here, which is Sennheiser HD 650, Fostech T40 RP MK3, very hard to drive magnetic planar, and another equally hard to drive Hi-Fi Man HE400 SE. So please remember that the sound impression which I will be sharing with you after this will be based on my listening experiences with all of my devices. Okay, now let's talk about power of this W4 and W4EX. You see, one of the key elements when Luxury and Precision released this duo is that it is advertised as being more powerful than the predecessor, which is W2. So let's just have a look here. In fact, I have conducted quite a bit of extensive tests in real life scenario. I don't have any kind of measurement tool, but I'm just going to use my own ears, using especially this very hard to drive headphone. So as you can see here, my first test with driving power, all right, using Sennheiser HD 650 here, okay, and this is in fact running in all high gain mode, no EQ, okay, running in USB exclusive mode, playing DSD, the highest resolution that I can think of, and In order to achieve proper listening loudness on this Sennheiser HD 650, on W4 itself, I have to crank the volume at around 70%, okay, out of 100. And when I switch to the blue one, which is this W4EX, I need to crank it a bit more at 74. So if you look at it, there's not much difference, right? It is perhaps kind of like between, at least on the loudness itself, just 4 levels up from 70 to 74 between these two. However, you have to remember, all right, the main difference between these two is that this gray one is actually rated almost double when it comes to the milliwatt per channel itself. So, despite the loudness being similar, I must admit that there's a bit more of authority and headroom offered by this W4 as compared to this EX. The sound signature itself is pretty much similar. The presentation itself is pretty much similar, but I can feel that especially when using highly demanding partners, headphones like this, right? The dynamic itself felt a bit more solid, a bit more, like I mentioned again, with authority. Okay, but if I am not comparing between the two of them, right, assuming that I only have this, I am already very satisfied with the kind of output which I got from them. And quickly comparing it against the rest of the competition, right? So surprisingly, in fact, despite the high power rating on paper advertised by this W4, in fact, I also have with me here, which is I'm reviewing as well, another video will be on this, is Canon RU7. And also I have with me here this very solid iBasso DC04 Pro. And if you look at the specification here, the result for this RU7 and DC04 Pro are in fact identical. And you must remember that, you know, DC04 Pro is rated at 4 VRMS, and I think RU7 is pretty much more or less the same. And the milliwatt is for DC04 Pro is in fact lower if I were to compare it against W4. But somehow the loudness level itself, they only needed at around 54 out of 100, both of them, to run this thing. So a manner of saying, at least from outright power perspective, I would say that RU7 and DC04 Pro proved to be the more powerful one. But how about the sound itself? Yes, again, right, I am definitely very satisfied with all 4 of them, sound-wise. But this is the most interesting fact. This is in fact my favorite here, Hebe FC6. And it only runs on 3.5mm single-ended. When I test all of them, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, side by side, surprisingly, this single-ended, which is definitely not like the rest of them, which all have 4.4mm balance. In fact, sounding as amazing, or in fact, I like it more, the output coming from this FC6. And it only needed to run at 27 out of 31. Yes, I know it's kind of a bit different with the volume step itself because FC6 only offer up to 31 step, not as refined as the rest, but the jump itself is definitely very well optimized. So it's pretty much almost close to 80%, I would say. Okay. But once the volume is achieved, no issue at all for this FC6 to run HD650. And it's pretty much similar with the rest of the headphone which I have tested here, as you can see yourself, all right? So, in fact, the hardest to drive among all 3 is this Fostech T40RP MK3 because it runs on 50 ohm at 91 dB. So, in overall, going back to W4 and W4EX, I would definitely say that if you have a need to run highly demanding partners, magnetic planar especially, it would be better to go for this W4 rather than W4EX. This W4EX still have ample juice to drive all these demanding headphone, but you're going to be losing a bit of the authority with the sound itself, okay? So that's pretty much the difference between those two. And also we have here the difference between this 4.4 mm balance and 3.5 mm single-ended. So after doing extensive tests, okay, and again, I have been using this Final Audio A5000, and this Final Audio A5000 is in fact the kind of configuration that you would see most in other AM, which is very low at 18 ohm, supposedly very easy to drive with 100 dB of sensitivity. And W4 itself, I needed to crank the volume again in high gain mode, similar kind of situation, all right, at 52 out of 100. And on the W4EX, it is pretty much at around 56, again around 4 steps different, right, from the 4.4 mm balance. And running on the 3.5 mm single-ended, especially for this the blue one, I need to crank the volume up all the way to 60 and 64 respectively. So definitely there's a difference in volume level. I would say that almost at around 8 step between the balance and single-ended. But how about the output itself, the quality of the output? You see, this is where it goes back to the sort of efficiency being offered. First, right, I would say that switching between 4.4 mm balance and 3.5 mm single-ended would probably not offer any kind of difference if the listening partner is already very efficient, sensitive, especially if your IEM is above 100 dB of sensitivity, and anything under, let's say, 24 ohm or even 32 ohm. Not so much on 32 ohm, because I can feel that when I connect, right, this dongle using something like Tanjim Zero or even Kinera Idun Golden, both of them are highly scalable. They perform better on the 4.4 mm balance, because the output coming from the 3.5 mm single-ended would appear a bit softer, less pronounced, and kind of a bit the age of the sound itself is not as crisp. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that the decision whether you want to use 3.5 mm or 4.4 mm balance is dependent on how scalable your listening partners are. Definitely, if you use anything much more demanding, always use 4.4 mm balance. That's how simple it is. Yet again, I also tested the volume differences between the other two competition. So as you can see here, again, RU7 and DC04 Pro in fact proved to be the more powerful between those two. Okay, and the last one here, which is also very, very important, especially if you are a mobile user running on Android phone, because this is tested on Android phone, and mine was in fact this Xiaomi Mi 90, which is 4000 mAh of battery, running in high gain mode, airplane mode also, and USB exclusive mode as well. So when I subject this to non-stop playback, both W4 and W4EX in fact score very impressive, over 12 hours of runtime continuously. So meaning that, going back to the power here, of course, with the outright power, it may appear to be not as powerful as RU7 and DC04 Pro, but the price of being powerful also is reflected on RU7 and DC04 Pro. You can see here that visibly RU7 only able to score 5 hours, whereas W4 is like 14 hours, almost more than double the runtime of the Pro. And DC04 Pro is pretty much not so terrible at 9 hours. In fact, it is quite normal for that kind of 4 VRMS dongle. And FC6 is also, being an R2R, runs at 9 hours. So being Delta Sigma and being, properly designed with the power circuit itself, I would say that definitely W4 and W4EX both being superior when it comes to power drain to the host. Alright, now let's talk about the most interesting part of this W4 and W4EX, the sound itself. Let me just put it this way. If you're already very familiar and loving the sound of W2 or W1, This W4 is definitely a successor to both W1 and W2. The sound tuning itself is pretty much similar, right? And in fact, it is definitely something which I would consider as very hi-fi, resolving, analytical, and yet very well balanced throughout the sound frequency, the dynamic range itself. It is, in fact, one of the best Delta Sigma DAC implementation that you can find in this form factor, aside from, of course, all the other dongle which I have tested, all the 5-star Delta Sigma. And I would say that one of the key factor to love this W4 is in fact how well the articulation of sound presentation itself. You see, despite, being very highly resolving and analytical, one of the key thing which I love about Luxury and Precision W series tuning is that the way they handle the dynamic transient itself, And what I'm trying to say is that it is not overly analytical or clinical to a point that it became sterile. It is easy to actually pick up micro and macro details, right? Yet at the same time, the flow of music, the harmony of the sound itself, it sounded neutral and natural. I do not feel that there's any kind of coloration or anything like that observed from either one of these. All right, it stays faithful to the intended source, especially the higher resolution you place it, right, the better sound it is. So what I'm trying to say as well, if you use this, something as resolving as this, listening to low quality source, in fact something which is like MP3 128 kbps, or in fact, a low resolution YouTube music, you would be also be hearing artifacts, any imperfection in the music itself. So the best way to put it is that, it all depends on what kind of source do you feed it. The higher quality the source is, the better you're going to get the sound coming from these two. And in fact, it also depends on how resolving the partner itself. So let's just go straight to the rating itself. After spending like 200 hours between the both of them regularly, and W4 itself, as you can see here, did a very impressive score of 90 out of 100. Definitely a 5-star performer. And in fact, if you look at the strength of this W4, it is on item number 1 and item number 4, which is the dynamic presentation itself and the technicalities. So let's talk about a bit more on technicalities, because if you are looking for something which is highly technical, look no further. This is one of those very, very technically competent dongle. It is a perfect 10 out of 10, especially when we talk about sound stage. All right. So if you want wide open sound stage, both of them, in fact, especially this W4 here, offer very wide. When I use it with any type of my IM, even my magnetic planar, I'm hearing a very open sound. All right. The depth, the definition itself, the spacing, the, separation, the spatial projection itself is just this simply amazing. It is top notch. And again, volume management, perfect 10 as well. I already mentioned earlier that this is independent volume adjustment. And to me, this is perhaps the only second dongle which achieved 10 out of 10 for volume management after DAC HD. So let's just have a look here. We already know that W4 and W4EX scores really high, 90 and 87 respectively. And let's just have a look first at the predecessor, which is W2. Okay, and it is in fact a clear improvement from W2 for both of these, because if you look at it, at the power rating of W2, if you look at the spec itself, it's pretty much similar to W4EX, but W4EX does it better in terms of here, the tone and timbre balance, and of course, pretty much the note weight and density is pretty much similar, but several other areas as well, especially pertaining to power efficiency. All right. So definitely, even EX itself is already an improvement over W2, okay? And let's just compare it against the rest. So as you can see here, right, it's pretty much self-explanatory, right? My actually favorite until today would still be Centrum's DAC HD and FC6. And they are perhaps the only one that scores perfect 10 on all 4 elements of sound. All right. And the reason that I'm saying that is that because let's just compare between FC6 and W4. You see, the key thing, right, which stands out for me is that, right, I always prefer natural, organic, and analog sound. And I am getting a lot of that tone and timbre balance, which is, neutral, but analog, the strongest coming from FC6 and DAC HD. Okay. And similarly, right, on the department of note weight and density, as you can see here, W4 is close enough at 9, but I can clearly hear that the sound is a bit richer, right? More defined with the resolution of the depth itself, the texture on this FC6 and DAC HD. Driving power is definitely, of course, DAC HD being the most powerful still at 775 milliwatt per channel, as opposed to 420 coming from W4. And next, let's just have a look at this comparison between W4 and DC04 Pro from iBasso. And in fact, if you look at the total score of DC04 Pro, it is identical to W4, right? Almost 1-to-1. Okay. And in fact, on the sound department itself, they are both identical. And the reason that I'm putting it this way, because when I did A/B testing between the two of them, with all of my listening equipment. Perhaps it's the limitation of my hearing or whatever it is. All right, I have tested at least 8 different sound equipment. I would say that pretty much it is kind of like hard for me to tell which one is better than the other. So let's just put it this way: both are already amazing when it comes to sound reproduction. Okay, in their own way. Perhaps I would say that W4 is a bit more on hi-fi sort of tuning, and DC04 Pro a bit more of analog sound of presentation. And I love both, definitely. And another competition which is pretty much practically on the same price bracket as W4, the i-Fi Go Bar. Alright. So in fact, if I were to look at the price at the moment, pretty much they are both almost the same, right, with the price itself compared to W4. And in fact, I must say that if you look at the configuration itself, the score, it is pretty much clear that W4 is definitely, I must admit, is the superior unit when it comes to overall rating. The next comparison would be against the duo of Canon, which is RU6 and RU7. Okay, so let's just have a look at this RU6. RU6, in fact, is identical to W4 with the total score. This is in fact the champion for 2022 dongle. In fact, my second favorite dongle after Centrum's DAC HD, before the arrival of FC6, of course. Okay, and if you look at the sound score here, again, it is identical between W4 and RU6. And they just slightly differ on this several area here. Okay, so let's just have a look. Let's just simplify this. Between RU6 and W4, I would say that the main difference being the tuning itself. It depends on your preference. Okay, technically both are very competent, but if you prefer analog sound presentation, R2R DAC always does it better than any Delta Sigma. Okay, so if you prefer the kind of concise, clean, measures really well kind of sound, right? Definitely W4 is a clear choice. But if you are like me, prefer a bit more of organic analog sound, yet analytical, right? You can always look for RU6. And moving on to RU7, as you can see here, RU7 is, simply put, an improvement over RU6. Yet again, okay, if we look at this sound element here, you would notice that RU7 scores a perfect 10 versus 9 out of 10 for W4. And the reason for that is, again, very simple. Analog sound. To me, sounding analog is all about natural sounding. Yes, the tone and timbre balance of W4 is definitely already almost perfect to my ears, okay? But I always prefer a bit more of analog timbre to the sound itself. Alright, let's just wrap things up for this Luxury and Precision W4 and W4EX. As you can see here, these two in my hand right now are among the very best portable DAC amp or dongles in the market money can buy. Yes, the price is very high, expensive, but let me just remind you again, as I mentioned earlier, it's none of my business, to say how you should spend your money. I just hope that my video has been informational and useful so that you may understand what kind of value and feature that you get from these two. And in fact, if you are an existing user of W2 and loving the sound, it is quite natural to upgrade to W4, especially this one, because you're going to get a bit more of soundstage and a bit more of refinement overall. And to be honest, I would think that moving from W2 to W4EX perhaps not so much of a difference, because they are pretty much similar with the power and everything else, but of course it still offer a bit more of wider soundstage as well. And in fact, it is even more appealing if you the type of user who love to play around with sound profile and EQ. Definitely with the kind of EQ preset, I can only think of two dongle that offer that sort of preset, which is this Luxury and Precision, the previous W2, and also Bluetooth Power S1 and S2. If you do have any further question which I have not covered yet, please feel free to drop a comment below and I will do my best to reply as soon as possible. Thank you for staying with me until the end of the video and you have a good day there.